All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back with questions from members of the file. If you'd like to learn more about our private member group, go to crisisinvesting.com. If you subscribe to the paid newsletter, you automatically get access to file and get access to asking Doug questions. So we have a bunch of questions here, Doug. But first, I want to talk about an article that you shared with me, really an editorial written by Billionaire Ray Dalio.
Yes, I got that sent to me by a mutual friend of ours who's, if not a billionaire, certainly a near billionaire, who kind of shares our overall view about the way civilization is going, which is why I sent it on. Anyway, this is very interesting. Ray Dalio is a very rich guy, very competent fund manager. Uh, what he's supposed to be worth $15 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, the title of the article is was it
It's pick a side and fight for it, keep your head down or flee.
yeah, exactly. Uh, that's a pretty disturbing article title from a guy in his position. And in the article, he goes on to explain why he thinks that the US is right at the tipping point. And the way he's reading things, he's done a lot of reading in history, it's pretty obvious, is that the country has the direction of the country has a life of its own. And we are at the end of what he calls stage 5, entering into stage 6. Well, you guys can read the article for yourself, but it's very bad. What it basically amounts to is the bottom line of what he's looking at. A civil war really is the most likely single scenario.
He says that there is a greater than 50% chance that there will be a civil war, regardless of the outcome of the elections in November. He does say, however, that that civil war does not necessarily have to take on a violent disposition. But he does say that there's a struggle that's going to happen with increasing disregard for the rules, the law, the role of judges in settling disputes, and it's going to be much more about power on power.
Makes all the sense in the world to me. And I don't know when I first started talking about a civil war, not like the unpleasantness of 1861 to 1865, which wasn't a civil war anyway, because a civil war is best defined as a conflict where two or more people, or groups, I should say, are attempting to gain control of one state. So they're fighting it out. That's a civil war. What we had from 1861 to 1865, the war between the states, was actually a war of secession, where half the country simply wanted to separate from the other half. I had an article in internationalman.com this week, which addressed a lot of the nuances of that and the US Revolutionary War and so forth. Anyway, people aren't lined up as neatly geographically now as they were in the 1850s. Now it kind of breaks down to cities versus country, coasts versus flyover country, this type of thing. So, and it's unlikely to be a civil war with real armies, as the last dust-up was. But it's interesting that Dalio sees in his position as a multi-billionaire who is extremely wired to the establishment that this is going to happen. And it's really nasty because a war with the foreign power, you more or less know who your enemy is. But a civil war, you're really, especially this kind of a civil war, you're not really sure. You've got to interrogate every individual and find out whether they're your tribe or the enemy's tribe. But it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. Dalio is right, in my opinion.
I just looked at the earliest I could find you talking about it was in May of 2011, a U.S.
Okay,
Civil War.
well, it's good to know these things in advance, but if you know them too far in advance, what good does it do you?
That's a good point. That's a good point. But yeah, he makes some really startling things in here that have to be uncomfortable for him to talk about. Like, there's a basic assumption that, hey, if Trump is in power, then you can imagine the far right extremists coming, and that's the greater concern. But he says, looking at what we see now, I'm not so sure that the Republicans are the greatest extremists, and the Democrats would be moderate. He might see it the other way. So he makes that claim. He also paints things very clearly as this, like, he says, you should decide if you'd be willing, if you'd be willing to live in a communist system or a fascist system, because that may be your choice. And I think he's a little confused on some of those things, but I like the stark nature of the choice he's laying out.
Yeah, pretty much. And those actually shouldn't be the two choices. Wait a minute, isn't a reasonable choice just a get along, go along, live and let live kind of society? That would be a reasonable choice. But we're not headed that way. The three options that he gives are prepare to fight, or flee, or keep your head down. But in a civil war, I think it's pretty hard to keep your head down, because they're going to try to root people out to determine if you're with us or against us, like the baby Bush spelled out years ago.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I don't think that keeping your head down really worked for a lot of people in the Russian Revolution. It didn't work that well for people, in with the Jacobins in France. I mean, keeping their head on was hard,
Yeah.
let alone their head down.
Yeah, you can't keep your head down. They'll find out who you are. You'll be interrogated. And if you're not really with them, then you're a backslider, or maybe even an enemy. So my view is that the best thing to do when you've got crazy people fighting is get away from them and go someplace else. So I pretty well made that choice. And I think that Argentina and Uruguay are excellent places to be at this point. And I think it's going to be, I don't think Dalio goes into Canada. He doesn't in that article anyway.
No.
But my guess is that Canada is going to have the same kind of troubles, not exactly the same, but for instance, their immigration policy. They're getting about 1.5 million new immigrants per year. Country's got 40 million people. And the vast majority of those immigrants are from the subcontinent. They're either Hindus or Muslims who do not get along very well in the subcontinent. And they're sticking together. I mean, the part of Canada I'm most familiar with is British Columbia. And the Indians all live together in certain areas. And they keep their culture, which is, I guess, kind of nice. I like Indian food, but Canada's going to have its own set of problems.
Yeah, well, I think you could look at the entire West and see that. I mean, what they're doing in Ireland and the UK and Germany and France. I mean, you see this happening everywhere. So,
yeah, and the Muslims are really right in the middle of all of this, because most of the migrants to Europe are of the Mohammedan persuasion. And Islam is different from any other major religion in that it's part of their belief system that the world should be converted to following the words of the prophet.
right. Well,
Well,
the religious practice involves the legal, like it's the same to them. So the religion should be the law, right? The Sharia law thing. So it's like they don't even have the disposition to consider those as two separate things. Whereas our inclination is that, hey, you can practice your religion, no problem. And so we assume it's no problem, but that's not the way that they view it. And so there's big attempts to enforce their law.
They pretty much want their religion to impinge on everybody else. Anyway, insoluble problem? Well, absolutely in the Middle East as far as Israel is concerned, but yeah, big trouble is coming. And I think everybody should read Dalio's article. He's a little bit too much of a fence straddler himself philosophically. In fact, these are philosophical problems. What are your basic beliefs of what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil? It's not a political thing, whether you believe in fascism or communism, which is the choice we're being presented with. So that's the problem with Dalio. He doesn't present having a philosophical center, which of course is the biggest problem with Trump, who absolutely does not have one.
Yeah, I'd say it's the biggest problem with the West at this point, to be honest. It's not just, and Dalio's, it might be a good example of this in a way, because, if you're a hedge fund manager, they're basically agnostic to what's good and bad. It's irrelevant to them what the right thing or the wrong thing is. It's just simply about winning this specific game. And he's one of the best that's ever existed at it. And so he's really good at assessing what's going on, and then placing chips on the table to win the hand. And I think he's done a great job of that, and he's applying that same sort of thinking to understanding and diagnosing the problem well. But of course, the solution is also probably agnostic in terms of what the right answer is.
Yeah, he's clearly a self-trained historian who's tried to do a good job, and I think he has done a good job at interpreting history and trying to figure out which way it's going. But there's more to it than that. And I'd like to know what his views are on philosophy, good and evil, and this type of thing. It would be very helpful. But we don't have that. Maybe that's his next book. I don't know.
Maybe,
but in any event, everybody should read that, because big trouble this way comes. And it's near at hand with this election, because no matter who wins, and who itself is much more of a question now than it was even a couple of weeks ago, the other side is just not going to accept them. It ain't going to happen.
Right. And when you have a guy who's basically one of the best in the world at assessing information and then placing bets, say that there's now a greater than 50% chance that after the elections, there will be a civil war in one form or another. Like that is a lot of weight to that for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I got a feeling that I'm going to be spending a lot more time down here in the Southern Cone, actually.
I think so. So get up there and enjoy the summer while you can, and then get back here.
I'm going to. It may be my last summer in North America for some time. We'll see. I hope not.
Okay. Well, so we have some questions kind of relating to this, because a lot of people sense this is coming. The first one is, many of us believe that the U.S. is slowly collapsing in just about every way. At the point in time when the collapse is complete or near complete, what do you think it would look like? What do you think the world looks like or starts to look like? I think people have a hard time imagining what, you know what I mean? Like, what has changed in the lives of average people, or like what's really different after this?
Yeah, well, it all centers around the US, because after World War II, the official statistics indicate that the US was about 50% of the world's economy. Huge number for a country with, what percentage do we have of the world's population? 4%? Yes, about. So we're about 25% of the world's economy right now. And we're the epicenter of what is going on that's bad in the world. Well, as Dalio was just pointing out. So what's it going to look like when the US changes? I could make this point couple of different ways. But first of all, Western civilization is kind of senior to America. And why is Western civilization different from any other civilization? And America has come to epitomize Western civilization. I made up a list, which we talked about in the past, of about 12 characteristics that make Western civilization, and especially today, since Europe should actually be flushed at this point, but there are 12 characteristics of Western civilization that they just don't have. Certainly not all of them, and not even most of them in other places in the world. Free thought. That's never been considered a real value other places in the world. Free speech, absolutely not. Free markets, yeah, to some degree in some places, but limited government, absolutely not. I mean, the rest of the world is kingships and dictatorships and whatever. The idea of individualism being enshrined as opposed to living for the state or living for the family or living for the culture. We don't think that way. We think in terms of individualism, rationality, thinking logically based on the facts. And actually, there's been active warfare against rationality because the fact that 2 + 2 = 4 is they've actually said that's white arithmetic. I mean, it's crazy.
It is white arithmetic. That's what we're talking. That's what we mean. That's why.
Yeah, so rationality isn't such a value anymore. And all you have to do is listen to one of Kamala's speeches to come to that conclusion. Liberty is a real virtue, but now liberty is seen as a danger because how can you have safe spaces when you have liberty? The concept of progress. Well, do people really want that? They want to cut back the use of fossil fuels, and energy is what civilization is based upon, actually. And anyway, progress leads to inequality because not everybody progresses at the same rate. I'm just skipping over this stuff in the most peremptory way.
I'll link to a video where we went over it more so people can watch a deeper dive if they'd like.
Yeah, okay. And privacy. Well, now surveillance is everywhere, and you're being monitored everywhere. And of course, if you live in a mud or straw hut, there is no privacy. You can hear and see everything your neighbor's doing. So that's kind of slipping away as well. Property rights. Oh, wait a minute. You'll own nothing and be happy. So they don't like the idea of property rights anymore. Rule of law. Well, we're seeing what's happening with the rule of law with Trump, whether you like him or dislike him. And of course, we have thousands and thousands of micro rules, which have nothing to do with the rule of law, actually. And last is the fact that we in the West have always idealized industry and enterprise. But now, in this world, everybody's got to be an employee, and it's more important to save the planet than to advance. And anyway, so that's a long answer to the question of what's it going to be like if the U.S. falls apart? Well, it ain't going to be good because the U.S. was kind of the homeland of all these concepts at this point. It ain't Europe anymore. Used to be. It's not anymore. So if the U.S. goes away, yeah, these thoughts, concepts will still be out there. Some people all over the world will have them, but there won't be an epicenter for them anymore if the U.S., falls apart.
And you gotta when you go through the list, those certainly are the values you could associate with Western civilization, but there isn't one of them you've mentioned that isn't already severely damaged by what's been done over the last whatever period of time, right? I mean, free speech, free thought. I mean, that's obviously, those things are clearly under attack. Private
Yeah.
property is definitely under attack. Yeah, I mean, I think all of them are. I mean, and I don't think
Oh,
Americans really, I don't think Americans really necessarily see those things as sacrosanct. Any of those
no,
things anymore.
no, they don't. In fact, I can't help myself uh, tuning into Mark Dice, who has a channel on YouTube, because he does an excellent rendition of what Jay Leno used to do, jaywalking, where Jay would go and ask a perfectly normal, average, intelligent-looking person some commonsensical question and get an idiotic answer. So Mark was doing this for his 4th of July show, and he was on Santa Monica Beach, upmarket area, asking people questions about the 4th of July. And they didn't even know, they knew nothing. I mean, who do we fight to get our independence? Uh, you know, some people would guess the Germans, or the Confederates. They don't even know that it was the British. So it's pretty hopeless.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of Independence Day, someone asked how you celebrated Independence Day.
I didn't. I celebrated. It was a day like all days, and I was here on the farm in Uruguay. No hot dogs. They don't have hot dogs here in Uruguay or Argentina, to my knowledge. How about you? Did you do anything yesterday?
Some friends of mine here, and the local file had everyone over for a barbecue, and we had hamburgers and lots of other really great stuff. Actually, they had a chef, this French chef, come in and cooked everything for us, and it was fantastic. And yeah, we had a nice time. No fireworks, no national anthem or any of that stuff, but hanging out with good people, having good conversation with good
But
food.
you could have had fireworks because you can buy all kinds of, actual skyrockets and
Really?
things blow up in the air. You can buy them here in Uruguay. It's not a problem. And you can set them off in your backyard, not a problem. So Uruguay is definitely freer than the US. So you could have
Well,
done that,
well,
which you could not
next
have
year
done
we
in the
will.
US.
Next year we will.
Yeah.
As I don't want to celebrate the US government, but I do like celebrating the ideas of independence, and those values that you went over.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So someone asked was talking about the elections. You got several questions about these elections that are happening in Europe. First one is about how the front page of the FT last week was dedicated to Le Pen's far right defeat of Macron, and they specifically discussed her party, I guess, as far right, and they said the far right has not been in power in France since the Vichy regime collaborated with the Nazis in the 1940s. So he's wondering about, what do you think about that comparison with the Nazis?
I think it's disgusting because the Nazis were socialists. I mean, Nazi is an abbreviation of National Socialist, uh, is what it is. And they're simply nationalistic socialists. And adopting the aspects of fascism, mentioned this before, but it can't hurt to mention it again. Fascism was a word coined by Mussolini in the 1920s, where the state and corporation should be together. The fasces, the corporations, and the state with the axe, the old Roman symbol. So that's what the Nazis were about. They're not far right. That's ridiculous. It besmirches the ideas of individualism and freedom and so forth, which are traditional values.
Right.
No, and she's not far right. What does that mean? To what I know, maybe you know more about what she believes than I do, but her main thing is She doesn't want the country to be inundated by Mohammedan people that are going to try to eventually impose Sharia and change France into a different country. Very reasonable.
Yeah, it
I
sounds like
don't know
sounds
what
like
else she wants to do.
she just opposes this unfettered migration that's happening. And I don't even, obviously she speaks French, and I'm not, I don't speak French, so I only get third hand. But my guess or my understanding is that her ideas are not even that radical with regard to those handling those things. To be honest, I would think that I think that people think of far right and far left. They do think of communism and fascism as that those are the two ends. And instead it's like far right would be holding up those 12 values, those 12 virtues of Western civilization as sacrosanct would be far right in my mind. And far left would be the collectivism side of it, that the individual, like the opposite of those. So
The
that's
opposite
me, is left and
values,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a much more reasonable and accurate distinction between between right and left. And anyway, there's nobody that has any respect for the values of freedom or any of these things. They're always far right. They're not just right as opposed to left. They're far right, but they never talk about anybody being far left in Europe. It's a subtle meme warfare is what it is.
It is. And they're winning on that because all of this is way, as we defined it just a minute ago, all of this is way left. None
Yeah.
of these things are pro individual, pro private property. They're all pro state in one
All
form or
pro
another.
state. That's right. And
Okay.
and tying Le Pen into the Vichy regime and the Nazis. I mean, that's just intellectually dishonest.
That's what we do. They do ad hominem attacks, putting a label on somebody, call them a Nazi or call them an anti-Semite or call them racist or call them a homophobe. And, that's how you handle arguments today.
Yes.
So what's your view of the UK's new prime minister, this Keir Starmer? Any
I
opinion of
know
him?
nothing about him, but since he's of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party has, since its very founding, always been pro-socialist with Marxist underpinnings, I'm sure almost all of his ideas are going to be destructive and bad and pro-state, anti-individual. I can
And
look into it.
he's
That's almost.
he's another guy associated with the WEF. So we got rid of Rishi Sunak, who was conservative WEF guy, replacing it with this Labor WEF guy.
Well, and I can certainly understand the Brits getting rid of the so-called conservatives, because the conservatives in Britain stand for absolutely nothing, or they're kind of like the not so extreme wing of the Labour Party, as it were. So it's meaningless. It's a distinction without a difference, increasingly, like the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. They're both the uniparty. It's mild distinctions in style, mostly.
I heard someone comment on this the other day. I wish I could remember who, so I give them credit for it. But they said, wouldn't it be nice if you had a labor leader who had ever done labor in their life? If you represent the working people.
You're right. They're all professional political hacks and bureaucrats, not working people, almost always.
It would solve a big problem, I think, if you got some, because they're practically minded. If you actually have to work for your, if you have to work for a living, I think at that point, you're going to have a much more practically minded view of the way the world ought to operate, rather than all these guys have all these abstract notions. They're from finance or lawyers or something else.
Yeah, or graduates of some university where they took courses in politics or sociology or gender studies or God knows what.
Exactly. All right. Next question is Doug a Liberland citizen, and what does he think of its future?
I probably should have become a Liberland citizen years ago just to show support for Liberland. And the founder of Liberland, Jalika is, I guess I've known Veet for a decade and talked to him many times, and he often shows up on a Zoom call that I'm on sometimes. So he's a good guy. Uh, I, yeah, I should probably just send in my application. Does it still cost $100, or has he raised the price a
Oh, I
lot?
definitely think it's a lot more than that.
Used to be
Um,
$100, I think.
really?
I thought so anyway.
Let me see if I can find it. Sorry, internet's loading slowly.
Well, the problem is that uh, many times when I've talked to Veet in the past, I said, look, if you want the country to be self-sustaining, you've got to be commercially oriented. You've got to be a business, so that you ought to find something productive that people want. That, for instance, you have a big mailing list. I think he's got a list of about 800,000 people. And there's got to be some tasteful and responsible way, since he wants to pretend he's a real government. I understand that. That you can use that list to generate income commercially. But he wants the Liberland to be sustained by donations, I guess. I don't know. It's not a sound economic platform, it seems to me, but
What I'm seeing, it looks like it's uh $5,000.
$5,000. Well, okay, if you want to make a charitable contribution, that's okay, but the passport's not worth $5,000. Why? Because it basically is not going to get you in any place. And if you want an extra identification document that looks good, get a World Service Authority uh, document. That does cost $100 and is, nifty looking with all the bells and whistles that you expect on a real passport. And so I have one of those just for old time's sake, because I knew the guy that founded uh, the World Service Authority way back when. And that's a whole long story. But I don't know. I
What do you
really wish
expect?
Pete well, but I don't know.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Um, does Doug think that anarcho-capitalism is a philosophy that in practice that is restricted to those of European culture? He says it's difficult to see such philosophies succeeding in Africa, Asia, or even Latin America. Just as the idea of America was unique throughout the world, is the idea of being free from a state limited to certain regions in the globe or certain peoples?
Well, that is a very intelligent, but very non-politically correct question. Uh, so is there a genetic element to libertarian beliefs? And I'm sure over time, uh, if people that breed with each other, that have a genetic makeup that makes them freedom inclined, and they train their children to understand these things, yeah, we could speciate along those grounds. In fact, I often wonder if people aren't already speciating on mental grounds,
I think
frankly.
there's a lot of evidence that is happening.
So it'll happen eventually, I suppose, when we go into space, perhaps. I mean, the human race will break into subspecies that may not even be capable of mating with each other if we
Mm.
go out many thousands or hundreds of thousands or certainly millions of years. I don't know.
It
I
seems
mean,
like
what I just said, that all these values are in the West. It's an open question. I'd like to think that I'd like to think that they're transferable to people all around the world.
Well, I certainly know individuals from all parts of the world who have adopted that philosophy, these different races and different upbringing. But I think as a society, it's culturally based. And the reason why it's falling apart, why there's no possibility of this at this stage in the US is because we don't, venerate these values in the culture, right? So we're losing it by not by race, but by culture.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a question of time and to the degree to which different cultures and different races mix. We'll find out. Look, mankind is still a pup, frankly. I mean, modern human beings have only been around, they guess, about 300,000 years to start with. So as species go, maybe that's not such a terribly long time. I mean, look at the dinosaurs. They were around not 300,000 years, but let me see, from the end of the Permian to the end of the, about 250 million years. 300,000, 250 million. That's about 1,000 times longer than we've been around.
Oh, okay. Doug, have you seen the latest real estate development company in Sark by Sven, mutual friend of ours? And if so, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Sark is a small island in the British Channel that is more or less independent. And Sven Lawrence is trying to buy enough real estate and induce enough people to like-minded people, libertarian thinking people, to move there so that the thing can be made to, yeah, it might work. In fact, I got from, I don't know, you probably got this too. It's a PDF that explains how this is going to work. And I think the minimum investment Sven's looking at is 100,000 pounds. I don't know what you get for that 100,000 pounds. I haven't even read the thing yet, but
Yeah, he created a company, and basically this is a financing for that company, and I believe he's trying to raise 35 million, I guess, pounds it would be in total, and he has a term sheet apparently with a large property owner there to, I think, the Barclay family actually is what it is, where he's buying it from, a whole bunch of property they own on the island. And then he has a whole plan for going to increasing the financing for it to acquire and develop more property, and ultimately to float it as a public entity. So he's got a kind of a long-term vision with it, and he's been working on it for a long time.
I'm favorably inclined towards it. As far as sending in my $100,000 or whatever, pounds, whatever, just got to see what I get. Am I making a charitable contribution to a good cause? Or am I actually getting a tangible piece of real estate? Now, the chances of my actually going to Sark, which is hard to get to, there's like one boat a day that goes there, and a helicopter can land there as well. And I think they've got like 2 restaurants on the island, that type of thing. So it's, it's not, but what value do you put on freedom? So I might do it yet. I've just got to see. But chances of my showing up there, relatively slim.
I love what he's doing. He's got a big vision for it, and he's putting together as he has so far. And obviously, he could still end up backing out of it for a number of reasons, like if he doesn't raise the money or can't conclude the sale with the Barclays. But it looks very interesting. Very interesting.
I'm all for it. Absolutely. Yeah. And I wish him success as I do Liberland, Vichalaikis project.
Yeah, all these things are great for people to be trying stuff. So let's see.
Yeah, as Mao said, let 100 flowers bloom.
But not with his same motivation.
No, not exactly.
So it seems that Trump is the politician who introduced much of the nation to the phrase draining the swamp. Trump is a pure narcissist and rather a jerk in the eyes of many people, including people who probably will end up voting for him. Is his narcissism and jerkiness the thing that makes him potentially able to drain the swamp? Should we look at those aspects as strengths instead of as irritating stupidities?
Yeah, I would look at them as irritating stupidities. The problem with Trump, and I've said this many times before for many years, is that he has no philosophical center. He doesn't have any core beliefs. But having been in business and being a practical guy, he wants to reduce taxes and he wants to reduce regulations. Okay, that's very reasonable for a businessman. But when he was in office, he never talked about abolishing any of these agencies. He only talked about pruning them back, making them more reasonable. So no, he won't succeed. He's the wrong guy. In addition to the fact that I'd say he's got very bad judgment when it comes to choosing people.
Yeah, and people say, well, he learned his lesson, and he's going to come back different. But it's like, you could say he learned his lesson after his first year in office or his second year in office, when he still could have made lots of changes and he didn't, So I don't know. I don't hold much hope with that.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when a guy's been in business his whole life and is in his 70s, well, okay, it's still possible to learn lessons, but his modus operandi and his beliefs are pretty ingrained at this point, such as they are. So sure, he's going to be a lot better than any Democrat, I hope.
Yeah. And he's got, I mean, if you think about the good things about him is that he's run a business successfully for his whole life, many of them. But the things he really is really good at, he's really good at. He's a really good marketer, actually, really good at selling. That's his biggest strength and deal making. But, imagine if his businesses had unlimited access to capital, which is what the government has, where he doesn't have to make hard decisions. He already has had issues with bankruptcy in the past because he had unlimited access to, he had limited access to capital. With unlimited, he grew the deficit by, what was it, $8 trillion or something like that?
Yes, he showed us his idea of financial management by running the deficit up by trillions. And he's always talked of himself as being a low interest rate guy, which means he doesn't understand the way money works. He doesn't understand the way the Fed works. He doesn't understand the economic ramifications of debt as opposed to the financial ramifications. If you have lots of debt and it goes up, yeah, you make more money. But that's about all he seems to understand. So no, he's a very flawed guy.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of a big open-ended question, but Doug, if you could live your life over, what would you do differently? Or would you do anything different? That's the question. Would you do anything different?
I'm not sure I would, because I've dodged most of the really serious bullets that can kill you. Like, I got married relatively late in life, but I didn't choose a crazy broad,
Right.
which a lot of guys do. That's a serious bullet that'll,
Yeah.
cut you in half or worse. Haven't committed any crimes. Yeah, so would I make any changes? Especially in my case, that when I've come to a fork in the road, I just take it. Not having ever laid out a real life plan for myself from an early age. I want to grow up to be president. Never thought that way in any area. So the answer is no. I will comment, however, that if I was born again now and could make some choices and had some guidance, I would do what your son Max is doing, which is to say, instead of just going off to high school and college and taking whatever they put before me, I would actively choose to use that time as wisely as possible and economically as possible. So I think all of our listeners should subscribe to Max's blog to see what he's doing and what I think any young man should be doing instead of going to college, or for that matter, going to high school.
Well, and it is what you think anyone should be doing, because he's specifically following a program that, you know, is inspired by you and is being further developed by, you know, you and I working on together. So it literally is what you would direct somebody to do.
I guess I'm not just talking the talk, but trying to help somebody else walk the walk. And hopefully a book that we're writing about this will be publishable by the end of the summer. I've got my fingers crossed.
Yep, that's what we're looking for. So yeah, you can find his Substack. It's at greatman.com. So he had a podcast he did called Great Man Podcast, where he would talk about figures he thought were great in history. So anyway, greatman.com if you're
A
interested.
weekly written blog as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, he writes an article every week, and then he also publishes a list of everything he did in the prior week, just to kind of show a big part of it is just to hold himself accountable to documenting his makes you make sure you're making progress each week and accomplishing more and more things. And honestly, he's crushing it right now. I'm very proud of him. He's doing a great job.
I totally agree.
So let's see. Next question is, what does Balkanization of the U.S. actually look like, and how likely is it? Does it look like Soviet Russia's decline, or is it more of a chaotic thing with bad actors, both internally and externally, who will capitalize on the chaos and make it worse?
You know, birds of a feather do tend to flock together. That's why all the Somalis who were imported, seems to me, to the U.S., all are either in around Minneapolis or someplace in Maine. That's why, you know, Mexicans tend to live in barrios together. This happens with all groups. Doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. They all do that. And since the U.S. no longer has, or less and less has, a culture that binds them all together as Americans, yeah, it's becoming balkanized. And I think that will be increasingly the case in the future. Somewhat reminiscent of what we were talking about with Dalio's paper.
Exactly. He said fight or flee, or keep your head down. In the flee part, he said he meant mostly within the borders of the U.S., where, you know, you would, through an orderly or disorderly means, kind of congregate where you can find birds of a feather. So yeah, that's happening.
So that's inevitably the way it's going to work out. And I have no doubt that 100 years from now, or probably much, much less than that, the colors of the map on the wall will have run, and the U.S. is not going to exist in its present form.
Okay. Let's see. He says, I'd like to know what Doug feels will be the final sign in the economy and country that would indicate that it's time to move any remaining funds in the U.S. to another jurisdiction or currency and move our persons to a more hospitable location. Like, is there like a event line, you know, an event horizon that, like, once this happens, you know, it's coming quick?
Well, the frog boiling is the best analogy. So where does the frog, who is in increasingly hot water, when does he decide I better jump out now, as opposed to a degree from now? It's the same thing. You can't wait until you've reached that point. You should see the trend of things and plan ahead a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought that if the day that you see capital controls rolled out in the country, you would know that it's time to go on vacation, and maybe that vacation lasts for a lot, you know, not 2 weeks, but maybe 2 years, you know, maybe it's, you know, maybe it's for good. But, you know, if you don't have your capital, at least a portion of it outside of the country before that, obviously that's not a good benchmark.
No, I'd hate to be separated from my capital. That would be inconvenient and make life potentially less pleasant. So I'd rather obviate that possibility.
Yep, I agree. Okay, let's see. Um, Doug, in a recent podcast with David Lynn, you mentioned that by far the USA slash Washington, D.C. is currently the most dangerous country in the world. Considering the influence and powerful lobbying groups like AIPAC, why do you believe that it is not Israel through its influence on American policy that poses this danger?
Well, the US really is like a T-Rex running around the world thinking it can destroy anything and do anything that it wants at this point. 800 military bases, wars that are big and little, fought everywhere. Yeah, it's become very dangerous. And what does AIPAC and the Israelis have to do with this? Well, look, all I can comment is that I think it's completely inappropriate for members of the US government and Congress to be Israeli citizens. That's a question of split loyalties. Whose interests are they really going to operate in and vote for? American interests or Israeli interests? So that's one thing that should be done, quite frankly.
Yeah, and then you could, I mean, I think also the issue with AIPAC is that doesn't have to register as a foreign lobbying power or something for some reason. You know, they get around this. There's a loophole for them.
What is the loophole? Is it because they're a religious group or?
I think that they're specifically exempted, as I understand it. Like, because
That
I
doesn't
think that
seem.
there was argument that I remember there was argument during the Kennedy administration that allegedly that JFK was going to force them to register, and that was a source of trouble.
Well, I guess you can't do anything like that because that would be considered anti-Semitic, idiotically.
Yeah, it would be. All right. So somebody asked if they can have gold and silver coins shipped to Uruguay, and if so, do you recommend anyone? And do you know if there'd be any fees or tariffs or other costs?
Didn't we look into this at one point?
Yeah, I had difficulty finding a way to ship them here. I do know that you can bring them on your person. Obviously, if it's below $10,000, it's no problem. If it's above $10,000, you can bring them. Just you have to declare them when you leave the U.S. and then on arrival, and there are no taxes on arrival. There's no duties. So I know this for sure for gold. I'm not sure if it's the same as true of silver.
Yes, I think you're correct. I think, didn't we, did you investigate Brinks, which are the
Yeah.
people who drive the big armored trucks around that ship these things internationally?
What I did is I looked at gold dealers and asked them. I I talked to them about placing orders, and they then assumed they could ship it and then found out that they could not. So I tried from both a European seller and also from a US seller that it did not, they just don't have, I don't know, maybe Briggs doesn't deliver here the same way. I don't know, but they were running into roadblocks. And so I do know for sure that you can bring in over the $10,000 number, and there isn't a limit on it that I'm aware of. I definitely know you can go hundreds of thousands of gold, and as long as you declare it on the way out and declare it on the way in, there's no problem. It's a pain in the ass on the way out of the U.S., honestly, but other than that,
Okay.
just because you have to go through this extra process.
Well, perhaps we should simply ask DHL or FedEx. They're in the business. They'd know, I presume.
Yeah, I'll find out about that.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Next question. So he says, I'd be interested in Doug's take on wheat and natural gas. He says, although I'm out of date a month or so due to travel, wheat with Ukraine, fertilizer issues, various countries with farm issues and Australian heat, etc., and other impacts over the last 24 months, plus inflation, it seems strange to still be so low. And I really don't see demand side reasons. There's also a lot of low quality wheat circulating, I believe. Any thoughts on this market?
I think wheat's getting to be pretty cheap. So I think you're smart to pay attention to it. Much more interesting, though, is natural gas. That's a long story, but let's put it this way. Natural gas is a hydrocarbon. Oil is a hydrocarbon. The chemists can pretty well interchange the hydrogen and carbon atoms in both of them and rearrange them. The fact of the matter is that right now, with gas at $2.50 and oil at $80, you're getting about 3 times more energy per dollar with natural gas than you are with oil. And eventually, I think, as technology progresses, they're going to equalize. So, answer to the question, natural gas is really cheap right now. And it's very complex about where it's being produced and problems with transporting it because it's a local market and on and on. But I'm very friendly towards natural gas, but the safest way to play it is with natural gas producers. And where can you go for that? Well, the 3 places where it's easiest for us to buy them are in the US and Canada and Australia. And happily, most of those natural gas producers, which also kick off some oil, most of them, you can get dividend yields of 3, 4, 5, up to 10% today. I think that's the way to play it because I'm very bullish on natural gas.
And we got some of those in the crisis investing portfolio. So if you subscribe to crisis investing, you can see some specifics.
Yeah, because I like collecting 8 or 10% in dividends while I'm waiting for the inevitable, which is hopefully the stocks go up 3 or 4 or 5 or more times, which I think will happen.
Okay.
But I like to be paid while I wait, you know.
It's the best possible scenario. Okay, just 2 more questions, Doug. It says, I hear Doug be rather supportive of Elon Musk. Is Doug aware of Elon Musk's parents? They seem rather dubious characters, to say the least. Bottom line, he says, I'm not convinced that Elon is the good guy.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know anything about his parents, really. I mean, all we really know is what we read in the popular press. How reliable is that? I will say that generally speaking, this is not a rule, it's more like a general guideline. The fruit doesn't fall too far from the tree. But on the other hand, people guide their own destinies. I'm a believer in nature more than nurture. So make of that what you will. But I like almost everything that I hear Elon saying, and he seems to be evolving in a favorable as opposed to an unfavorable direction. But it's not like I closely monitor his career or his statements. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I think I think we have reason to be suspicious of Elon. And I know you have some of those, you don't know and kind of concerned about it too. But there are some things he says that are very counter the globalist narrative, like he says he was the first public figure to talk about the population as we have a depopulation problem, not a overpopulation problem, and he has been a big advocate for children. Now, you don't see any of these evil psychopaths out there, any of them ever talking about the need and value of children. And so that to me that's like the most positive litmus test you could possibly find on him, which I think I got to put that in a plus column, regardless of everything else.
I agree. I agree completely.
Because I certainly sit in the same position as him on that. Now he's been wrong on a lot of other things. He's involved in all kinds of, he gets his funding from the government and for everything. Basically, he's clearly tied with the intelligence services. If you're doing space launches and you have this satellite system, I mean, clearly you have to be you wouldn't be able to exist unless it's collaborative in some way. And that all concerns me. But at the same time, I'm sitting here on my Starlink right now in a rural part of Uruguay able to have fast internet because of it. And that's a valuable, useful thing. I owned a Tesla before, and people like almost dogmatically love or hate EVs. Well, I don't have that view. I've had owned a lot of cars in my life. The Tesla that I owned, Model X, was great. Zero maintenance issues in 3 years. Never had to go to a gas station. It was fast and fun to drive. I mean, you rode in it, Doug, once. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
sure.
nice car.
I'm all for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not all bad. It's like, and I think the other thing is that we do this kind of blanket. You got to be you're either with us or against us. Like you have to resist your own desire to go, oh, he's in the bad club and he's in the good club, and doing these purity tests on people, deciding you can like what somebody does and also and dislike other things they do and that be okay. You don't have to be like, no, I'm on his team, he's my man,
Which is the rational way to approach it. But I think there's going to be less in other words, as the battle lines are being drawn for the coming, whatever looks like a civil war, there's going to be less proper discrimination and more lumping of people into our guy or their guy categories.
Unfortunately, that's true. And you see it more in the comments and from people, it's getting more divisive. And that is one of the things that Dalio talks about. As you see
Yeah.
that divisiveness grow, it's bad.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question. This guy, he says, I have decided to knuckle down and fight. Again, with Dalio's thing. So he's not going to keep his head down. He's not going to flee. He said, knuckle down and fight. What he means by that is, I'm just going to sit back in places and he has the access and credentials to smooth out things for some people and stop bad when I can. He says, so far, I think I'm doing a lot of good, trying to be a real life version of the Robert De Niro character in Brazil, I guess, except I work in security in a place where private security can actually subtly help a lot of people. How stupid is this approach?
Sounds very reasonable. Sounds intelligent to me. And I know that when I saw that movie, Brazil, a Monty Python movie, wasn't it? I thought it was really funny. And I liked De Niro's character there, who was, unlike unlike his real life persona, was very appealing. And as far as being in the security business, that's fine. Yeah, one of my favorite people in popular literature is Paladin from Have Gun Will Travel, kind of a security guy. But in today's world, it's harder to play as if you're Paladin because you'll constantly be wrapped up in lawsuits with people suing you for 1,000 different things on something that you do in absolutely every weekly series.
Yeah. Well, you can do it.
In today's world, if Paladin existed, he'd be living in a court, not out on the frontier.
Or in Guantanamo.
Yeah, he'd be in Guantanamo, exactly. But no, I think it's fine what you're doing.
Yeah, I think Dalio says this right. These are our choices. You fight, you flee, or you keep your head down. Maybe I don't know if that'll work, but it's fight or flee are the options. And I think this guy's approach, like, he has a plan. He has a way to have an impact that he can feel good that he's doing something. I think that's good. I think that's good.
Yes, and always be in a position where you can defend yourself. I'm certainly not a pacifist, not aggressive, but certainly not a pacifist either.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. I know you are traveling to the US, but we will be back next week with more.
With a little bit of luck, yes. Okay, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
See you then. Thanks.